This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, this is a Mitchell Langbert moment brought to you by the Glazov Gang. I want to thank Jamie for asking me to produce this moment because I had written him an email about his earlier podcast on the failure of conservatives. And I agreed with almost everything he said, but I disagreed with one point, which is that he takes issue with the tendency of conservatives to disengage. And I disagree that disengagement is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing if you drop your cable subscription or stop reading the New York Times. Why delude yourself? However, it's also true that if you do disengage, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to our society, you owe it to the future of America to make use of that disengagement and to use it as a tactic. And the idea of doing things that you're good at comes from, as Jamie mentioned, Saul Alinsky. And Jamie is right that Alinsky and Antonio Gramsci are great sources of strategy for conservatives. And when I think about the conservative movement of the past 60 years, what I see is mostly failure. Government has grown at an astronomical rate. Our culture has been taken over by the extreme left. The universities are dominated by the extreme left. The media is dominated by the extreme left. And I think a lot of the reason is our failure to understand the principles of radicalism that Alinsky talks about in his book, Rules for Radicals. Now, if you look at what the rules for radicals are, first and foremost is that you need a constructive alternative, that once you win, you need to have a counter-narrative of some kind. And I think part of the problem with conservatism is that it's been viewed by conservatives as a philosophy of reaction, as a philosophy of, and this goes back to Burke, Edmund Burke, and Russell Kirk more recently in the 50s and 60s, that conservatives are supposed to slow the pace of change rather than initiate change. And I think that's a complete mistake. If you allow the left to be the chief agent of change, then all that will happen is that what they want will occur at a slower pace. And in fact, if you look at the original progressives, such as Walter Weil, that's exactly what he talks about, that progressivism back in 1905, or around the time he wrote his book, The New Democracy, was that the future would lead to socialism if America adopted progressivism back then. And he was right, because what's happened is that we've had a conservatism of passivity and conservatism, if you will, and we have not allowed ourselves as classical liberals to place our vision of a free society, of free enterprise, of traditional social values at the forefront of our motivations. And so I think first and foremost, we need to retake the leadership. We need to be the ones initiating change. And I think the very name conservatism is in part a strategy, a language strategy, an Orwellian language strategy of the left. My friend Dan Klein says we should call ourselves liberals because that's really what we are historically, and I think he's right. And once we have a vision, and I think the vision needs to be simple, it shouldn't be anything too elaborate, basic ideas of freedom and liberty and basic values, that we need to focus on actions that we enjoy doing. And if disengagement is something we enjoy doing, then we should be disengaging, but we should be disengaging in a constructive way. And what I mean by constructive is that we should use our opponent's book of rules, and this again comes from Alinsky, to overturn their pattern of thinking. So, for example, Disney has had a habit of firing TV stars through political correctness, and their subsidiary, ABC News, has a habit of broadcasting fake news. So what we might do is put on a Mickey Mouse cap, buy a share of Disney stock, go to the shareholder meeting, and ask them, why is it that ABC News is Mickey Mouse? And why is it that they're hurting their own ratings by playing the political correctness game? So in other words, we should stay within our own expertise, make our opponent live up to their rules, and in the case of Disney, one of those is profit making. And we should also think about ways to freeze our target. And I think conservatives have been terrible at doing that. Just to take one example, Ted Kennedy actually did engage in collusion with the Russians. If you read Mark Levin's book on the media that just came out, I'm right in the middle of it, he talks about the letter that was found in the Moscow files where Ted Kennedy had actually written a letter to the Russian state offering to collude with them to overturn Reagan's election. No Republican ever made hay out of that kind of collusion, but we've had 2 years of fake news about a non-existent collusion. How is that? And the same thing was recently seen with Stephen Moore, with Herman Cain, the 2 Fed appointees that were overturned. And many, many conservatives, including me, have been targeted, frozen, and attacked by Antifa, or I should say Antifa, and the compliant media, starting with the New York Times and CNN. So I think what we need to do is learn to freeze the opponent, criminalize Nancy Pelosi, or criminalize Ted Kennedy, and learn to attack them the way that they've learned to destroy Republicans. So in sum, I would like to say that conservatives need to start to think like radicals. We should stop thinking of ourselves as conservatives. We should stop playing the game of conformity. We should ask ourselves, if the media says some kind of speech is offensive, perhaps it is the media that is offensive. And I would like to thank Jamie Glazov and remind you that this is a paid a site that requires funding, and I hope you're subscribed to Jamie's site. Thank you.